first time I said, "There's still time," I was standing in my mother's kitchen with a paper plate in one hand and my car keys in the other. It was a Sunday in August, hot enough that the window over the sink fogged at the corners. She had made too much food like she always did, and the radio was playing an old country song so low it sounded like it was coming from another house. She was telling me about a doctor appointment. She had moved again. Not canceled, she said, just moved. "I feel fine," she told me, waving her hand like she was shooing away a fly. "They just want to poke around and charge me." I remember laughing because that was what we did in my family when something made us nervous. We turned it into a joke and moved on before anyone had to sit with the feeling. I set my plate in the sink, kissed her cheek, and told her I'd come by next week. She touched my forearm and said, "Don't work yourself to death." I was already halfway to the door when I answered, "I won't. We've got time." That sentence followed me for years. I used it on everything I didn't want to face. "I'll call him next week. I'll fix that this summer. I'll take the trip when work slows down. I'll say the thing when I can say it right." I acted like time was a savings account I could draw from whenever I felt ready. What I understand now is that I wasn't trusting time. I was hiding in it. Time let me postpone decisions without admitting I was afraid. If I said later, I didn't have to say, "I'm scared of what I'll hear," or "I don't know what to do if this changes," or "I'm not ready to see the people I love get older." Back then, I still thought life moved in big, obvious events, the kind you can circle on a calendar. You get married, you buy a house. Someone retires. Someone dies. I didn't know most of life is decided in the small gaps between those events, in the visits you skip, the calls you shorten, the questions you never ask, because the answer might change the room. I drove home that Sunday with the windows down and one hand on the wheel, feeling like a man with a full tank and a long road ahead. The sun was dropping over the fields, and I remember thinking I'd stop by next weekend and help her with the porch steps she kept mentioning. I even pictured it, a Saturday morning, coffee in travel mugs, my tools in the truck, me finally taking care of it. Next weekend came. I took an extra shift instead. The porch steps waited. My mother waited. And I kept telling myself the same thing in a calmer voice each time, like repeating it made it true. There's still time. By the time I was in my 40s, I had built a life that looked solid from the road. I had a decent house, steady work, a garage full of tools, and a reputation for being the one who handled things. People called me dependable, and I wore that word like armor. Dependable men don't fall apart. Dependable men don't panic. Dependable men keep moving. What nobody saw was how much of my life I ran on delay. I delayed appointments. I delayed rest. I delayed hard conversations until they got hard in a different way. If something needed feeling, I put it behind something that needed doing. The lawn, the truck, the invoices, the gutters. There was always another task I could point to and say, "I'll get to the rest after this." My younger brother Danny used to call me out on it. He was the opposite of me in almost every way. He talked fast, laughed loud, and would say the thing I was still organizing in my head. He'd call on a Tuesday just to ask if I wanted to grab a beer, and half the time I'd tell him I was slammed. "You're always slammed," he told me once. If they put that on your tombstone, at least it'd be honest. I laughed because he made it sound funny, but it bothered me more than I admitted. The truth was I envied him. He could walk into a room and be fully there. I walked into rooms carrying lists. One November he invited me to a weekend fishing trip at a lake we used to visit with our father. Just 2 nights, he said. No big plan. We'll freeze, complain, and catch nothing. I almost said yes. I could feel the words sitting right there. Then I looked at my calendar, saw a Monday deadline, and did what I always did. I turned a choice into a postponement. Rain check, I told him, after the holidays. He was quiet for a second, then said, "You say that a lot." "I mean it," I told him. "I know," he said. "That's what worries me." The line went quiet after we hung up, and I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, irritated in the way people get irritated when someone tells the truth too cleanly. I wanted to call him back and say yes. I wanted to be the kind of man who could shift a plan and choose a person. Instead, I opened my laptop and answered emails until midnight. That winter moved fast. Work got heavier. My mother started getting tired more often and brushed it off. Danny kept calling, less often now, but he still called. Each time I told myself I'd make time soon, like time was a thing you could manufacture if you just tightened your schedule enough. What I didn't see was that every "not this week" was a decision, even if I refused to name it that. I wasn't preserving time. I was spending it quietly on everything except the people I loved. And time, I was beginning to learn, keeps perfect books, whether you look at the ledger or not. The call about my mother came on a Thursday morning while I was under a sink at a rental property, shoulder wedged against old pipes and rust flaking onto my shirt. My phone vibrated twice in my pocket, stopped, then started again. I almost ignored it. I was already behind, and the tenant was standing nearby, sighing like every extra minute cost him money. It was Danny. I answered with my voice still in work mode. "What's up?" His voice was wrong immediately, too flat. "She's at County General," he said. "They found something on the scan. They want to admit her." I slid out from under the sink too fast and hit my head on the cabinet. The room flashed white for a second. "What do you mean, found something?" "I mean, get here," he said, and then softer, "Don't wait." That drive is still in me. I remember red lights feeling personal. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my forearms cramped. I remember praying in the kind of desperate bargain-making way I hadn't prayed since I was young. Just let me get there. Just let this be smaller than it sounds. Just give me one more stretch of ordinary. When I reached the hospital, everything looked clean and indifferent. Bright floors, low voices, vending machines humming like they belonged in a bus station. My mother looked small in the bed, smaller than she had looked in my mind. She still managed to smile when she saw me, and that somehow made it worse. "Well," she said, "guess they finally got me in here." I stood beside her and did what I knew how to do. I asked questions. What did the doctor say? What are the next steps? What time is the specialist coming? I talked like a man building shelves while the house was on fire. My mother watched me for a moment and then touched my hand. "Sit down," she said. I sat. "Don't act busy with me," she said. Her voice was tired, but there was no meanness in it. "Just be here." That sentence cracked something open in me because it named exactly what I was doing. I had spent years acting busy around the things that scared me. Busy looked strong. Busy looked useful. But standing there, hearing machines beep while my mother's fingers rested on my knuckles, useful was not what she needed from me. Danny came back with 2 coffees and handed me one. He didn't say "I told you so." He didn't have to. He sat on the other side of the bed and started talking to her about a stupid dog at his job that kept stealing gloves, and for 10 minutes she laughed in that weak hospital way that still sounded like her. I watched them, and all I could think was how close I had come to missing the call, how close I had come to saying I'd come after I finished the sink. I told myself I would do better now. I told myself this was the moment I would stop delaying what mattered. I meant it, I really did. But meaning it and living it are not the same thing. And I was about to learn the difference the hard way. My mother came home after 6 days with a folder of instructions, 3 new prescriptions, and a smile that made everyone in the room pretend things were simpler than they were. The doctor had used a lot of careful words: concerning, monitoring, aggressive, treatment options. We clung to the words that sounded manageable and set the rest on a shelf in our minds. For the first few weeks I showed up. I drove her to appointments, fixed the porch steps I'd put off for months, and sat at her kitchen table while she complained about hospital pudding and the way every doctor typed while she talked. I remember one rainy Tuesday when she was slicing apples at the counter, moving slower than she used to, and she said, "I like having you here." I answered too quickly, "I should have been here more." She shrugged like she was letting me off easy. "You're here now." That sentence gave me comfort at the time. Now it haunts me a little because I used it the same way I used everything else. I took it as permission to believe I could catch up all at once. I thought if I gave enough effort now, it would cover the years I spent saying later. Then work got ugly. A contractor I depended on walked off 2 jobs. One tenant stopped paying. A pipe burst during a freeze, and I spent 2 nights mopping and calling insurance. I started doing what I'd always done when pressure hit. I narrowed my world to the next problem. I still called my mother, but the calls got shorter. I still visited, but I moved through the visits like I was timing them. One evening I was standing in her living room, coat still on, phone buzzing in my pocket every 30 seconds. She was in her recliner with a blanket over her legs, and the lamp beside her threw a soft yellow light across the room. She looked tired but alert. She kept trying to tell me a story about a woman from church who dyed her hair black and scared her own husband. I laughed at the right places, but I wasn't listening. I was reading texts off screen and giving half answers. My mother stopped talking mid-sentence. "Go handle your business," she said. I looked up. "No, I'm fine." "You're not here," she said. "Your body is, not you." I sat down then, mostly out of shame, and put the phone on the coffee table face down. We were quiet for a minute. The rain tapped the windows. The clock on her wall clicked louder than I remembered. "I keep thinking I'll have more time," I said, and the words came out before I could smooth them over. She looked at me in that steady way she had, the way that made lying feel childish. "That's what everyone thinks," she said. She wasn't angry. She wasn't dramatic. She was just telling me the truth from farther down the road than I was standing. I stayed another hour that night and actually listened. I even canceled a call. It felt small and huge at the same time. Driving home, I promised myself I was done pretending. I was going to reorder my life. The slide never looked like a collapse. That was the most dangerous part. If I had fallen apart, I might have noticed. Instead, I drifted back into old habits, wearing fresh excuses. Treatment had started. Some days my mother looked stronger. She was joking again, cooking small meals, even fussing at me for replacing a cabinet hinge. She said worked fine. The ordinary moments made it easy to believe the danger had moved farther away. I started spacing out visits, just by a day at first, then another. I told myself I was giving her rest. I told myself she didn't need me hovering. Danny noticed before I did. He called me on a Sunday evening while I was in the garage changing brake pads. "You coming by Mom's tomorrow?" he asked. "I can't tomorrow," I said. "I've got inspections all day. Tuesday, maybe." He let out a breath I could hear over the clink of tools. "She asked if you were coming this weekend." "I was there Wednesday." "I know when you were there," he said. "I'm telling you, she notices." That hit me harder than I expected, and my first instinct was to defend myself. I started listing things, work problems, bills, the mess with the contractor. Danny cut me off. "I'm not saying you don't care," he said. "I'm saying you keep acting like caring later counts the same." The garage went quiet except for the radio and the tick of cooling metal. I wanted to tell him he was unfair. I wanted to tell him he didn't understand what I was carrying, but I knew he understood exactly. He was carrying it too. He was just carrying it while still showing up. "I'll go Tuesday," I said. He didn't fight me. "Okay," he said. Then he added, "Just don't keep saying Tuesday until it turns into next month." After we hung up, I stood there holding a socket wrench, angry in that familiar way that hides guilt. I told myself I'd prove him wrong. I'd go Tuesday, stay late, take her groceries, fix the back gate, all of it. I even made a list on a scrap of cardboard near my workbench. Tuesday morning, I woke up to a voicemail from a client threatening legal action over a leak in a unit I had already repaired. By noon, I was at a courthouse filing paperwork. By evening, I was exhausted, irritated, and full of that old story. I can't show up like this. I'll go when I'm less distracted. I didn't go. I called instead. My mother sounded winded but cheerful. "Don't worry about me," she said. "Take care of your work." I said I'd come Thursday. I meant it. Thursday turned into Saturday. Saturday turned into early next week. Every delay was small enough to justify and large enough to matter. I could feel the truth of it, but I kept walking around it because the truth demanded a change I still treated like a future project. What I didn't know was that time doesn't care whether your reasons are valid. It keeps moving while you explain yourself. And mine was moving faster than I wanted to believe. The night everything shifted for good was cold and clear. One of those winter nights where every sound carries. I was at home at my kitchen table, invoices spread out, trying to untangle a problem that looked smaller on paper than it felt in my chest. I had my phone on silent because I wanted 1 hour without noise. When I finally turned it over, there were 4 missed calls from Danny. I called back and he answered before the first ring finished. "Where are you?" "At home. What happened?" "She fell," he said. His voice was sharp with panic and anger both. "She's in the ambulance. I've been calling you for 20 minutes. I don't remember grabbing my coat. I don't remember locking the door. I remember the road, the dark, and the sound of my own breathing filling the truck cab like I was being chased. At a red light, I hit the steering wheel and said out loud to nobody, "Not now, please, not now." At the hospital, they had her in a room with bright lights and too many wires. She was conscious, but she looked drained in a way I had never seen, like the effort of staying in the room had become work. Danny was standing by the wall, eyes red, jaw tight. He didn't hug me. He just moved aside so I could get close to the bed. My mother opened her eyes when she heard me and gave me a tired half smile. "You made it?" she said. Those 3 words broke me because I heard everything inside them. Not accusation, not pity, just fact. "You made it? This time?" I sat and took her hand, and for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to be useful. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't look for the doctor. I didn't make a plan. I just held on. Around 2 in the morning, after the tests and the waiting and the endless hallway footsteps, Danny and I sat in plastic chairs while my mother slept, and the vending machine light painted everything a sick blue. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and said, "I'm tired of pretending we have forever." I stared at the floor and nodded. "I know." He turned to me then, not cruel, just exhausted. "Do you?" I started to answer and stopped. The truthful answer was ugly. I knew it in flashes, in hospital rooms, in late-night guilt, in promises made driving home. But I kept living like the calendar would make room for me whenever I finally got around to changing. I knew and I didn't act. That was the whole problem. "I thought I had more time," I said. Danny rubbed both hands over his face. "We all think that," he said. Then one day the phone rings. We sat there in silence after that, and the silence felt deserved. Not punishment, just reality settling in. I realized then that regret rarely arrives all at once. It collects in layers until one night you can feel the full weight of it, and there's nowhere left to set it down. When the doctor came in before dawn, his face told us the truth before his mouth did. The last good week with my mother was not dramatic. That's what I remember most. No speeches, no big reconciliations, just ordinary pieces of life and me finally paying attention while they were still happening. I brought soup one afternoon and she complained I used too much pepper. I fixed a loose curtain rod while she told me again the story about the church lady and the hair dye, and this time I listened all the way through. We sat at her kitchen table and shelled peas into a bowl while a game show played in the other room. Her hands were slower than they used to be, but they still moved with that familiar rhythm, and every now and then she glanced at me like she was checking whether I was really there. I was. That is a small sentence, but it took me years to earn it. One evening after Danny left, she asked me to help her to the porch so she could sit for a few minutes before dark. I wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and brought out 2 mugs of tea. The porch steps I had postponed for months held steady under our feet. I noticed that and felt a sharp little ache at how proud I used to be of fixing things after the urgency was already gone. The sky was pink over the trees. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked twice and then stopped. My mother held her mug in both hands and said, "Your father used to think if he worked hard enough, he could outwork time." I looked over at her. "I think I learned that from him." She smiled without looking at me. "Maybe. But he learned too. Near the end, he learned." I let that sit between us for a minute. Then I asked the question I should have asked years earlier, the one I had avoided because it felt too open, too dangerous. Were you lonely? I said, when I kept not coming around. She was quiet long enough that I almost told her to forget it. Then she said, sometimes, but more than lonely, I worried for you. For me? She turned and looked at me straight on. You were always somewhere else, even when you were right in front of me. That's a hard way to live. I felt tears come before I could stop them. I wiped my face with my sleeve like a boy and laughed once, because I didn't know what else to do. I thought I was doing things right. I said, I know, she said. Most people do. We sat there until the air got cold and the tea went lukewarm. I didn't fill the silence with promises. I didn't say I'd make it up to her. I finally understood. Some debts don't get paid back. They get carried honestly. When I tucked the blanket tighter around her and helped her, inside she squeezed my hand and said, thank you for being here. That sentence stayed with me because it was simple and complete. No history erased, no grand forgiveness speech, just a moment, fully lived while it still existed. For the first time in a long time, I went home without telling myself I'd do better tomorrow. My mother died on a Tuesday, just before sunrise. The room was dim except for the monitor light and a stripe of blue morning pushing through the blinds. Danny was on one side of the bed, and I was on the other. We had been there all night, half talking, half sitting in the strange quiet that takes over when words stop being the main thing. Near the end, she woke for a minute and looked at us in a way I still can't describe without getting it wrong. Tired, yes. In pain, probably. But there was something else too. Something settled. She looked at Danny, then at me, and whispered, "My boys." Those were her last clear words. After she was gone, the nurse gave us time. Danny cried first, hard and open, his face in both hands. I cried the way I always had, silent at first, shoulders locked, then all at once when the room emptied and there was nobody left to perform for. I kissed my mother's forehead, and it was already cooler than I expected. That detail still undoes me. The days after were a blur of casseroles, paperwork, church flowers, and people saying kind things with no place to put them. Everyone told us she knew we loved her. I believe that. I do. But grief has a way of making room for two truths at once. She knew I loved her, and I still wasted time I didn't understand I was wasting. That truth followed me long after the funeral. It followed me when I cleaned out her kitchen and found the little notebook where she kept grocery lists and phone numbers in the same neat handwriting. It followed me when I opened a drawer and found the church bulletin from a Sunday I had promised to attend and skipped because of work. It followed me when I sat in my truck outside her empty house and realized there would never be another casual Tuesday to stop by later. For months I kept hearing my own old sentences in my head. After the holidays, next week, when things calmed down, I heard them like recordings from a man I knew too well and didn't fully trust anymore. What I understand now is simple, but it cost me to learn it. Time is not a pile, it is a stream. You don't save it by standing still and planning better. You stand in it, or you watch it move past while you organize your reasons. I still work hard, I still make lists. I still feel the pull of delay when something asks more of me than money or effort, but when my phone rings now and it's someone I love, I answer. When I tell someone I'll come by, I go. When an ordinary moment opens, coffee on a porch, a short drive, a quiet talk at a kitchen table, I try not to treat it like a placeholder on the way to something more important. That was my mistake for years. I thought life was waiting up ahead in the big moments. Most of it was already happening while I said I'd get to it later. I thought I had more time than I did. I was wrong.